Hi, I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Well, today I want to talk about something that I think people want to better understand because we are in eclipse season this month of September. What are eclipses and how can we better use them in terms of understanding ourselves? Because remember, that is why we get into astrology in the first place, to better understand ourselves and, of course, the world around us. Astrology is the tool for self-knowing. So many people really don't understand Rahu, Ketu, and the eclipses. And I want to explain it so that people really do understand it. And let me just say this, there are so many astrologers out there on YouTube and Instagram. And let me just say this, they have not had the proper training. This is probably the only science in the world that people can go out and say, I'm an astrologer, and they might have read one book. This is a problem. That is why I formulated my school, the University of Vedic Astrology, where I train people to become astrologers, but it's a very stringent course that makes people study and really learn what astrology is. The astronomy, the astrology, the symbology. People have bits and pieces of information and they think they're authorities. And this is the only science that's where it is like this. And unfortunately, I have to say it gives it a bad name. I want to change that. And that is my mission here, and that's why I started my school. I believe people should be properly trained, especially if they're going to be giving very important advice to people. This is crazy, really, what's going on in our field, but I'm out there to rectify this. But the first things first, I noticed so many people don't really understand eclipses. From one of my videos that I put out, everyone was saying, oh, she doesn't know what she's talking about. I find it kind of entertaining that, that people who have no degrees are telling me that I don't know what I'm talking about. It's just, it doesn't make sense. So let me rectify this and let me put a better understanding about eclipses. I have been into eclipses forever, and I've taught about eclipses. Even when I was a Western astrologer, I spoke of the Sorrow series. And let's get down and help you better understand what an eclipse is. Now, one thing I do want to point out is my book on Rahu Ketu. I wrote this in 2017, and it's Rahu and Ketu, our karmic destiny through eclipses. Because it's Rahu and Ketu that do form the eclipses. And I think that's why people were so confused with this eclipse that's happening this month. Because an eclipse is in reality where the sun and the moon are. And when we have a solar eclipse, that's a new moon. When we have a lunar eclipse, that is the full moon. But let me just say this, a solar eclipse is the focal point, not the lunar eclipse. A lot of people put so much emphasis on lunar eclipses, and yes, they are important, but it's the solar eclipse that is the focal point. And I'll tell you why. Because during the times of eclipses, there may not even be a lunar eclipse, but there's always a solar eclipse. So the solar is the most important one. And when I speak of eclipses, I'm talking about the solar eclipse, not the lunar eclipse. And let me explain all of the rhyme and reason for how eclipses are formed and what they're about and how we can better understand our lives with them. They are so vitally important. And before I proceed, I always have to remind everyone to sign up for my free newsletter. Go to galacticcenter.org and you will get all my predictions delivered to your email weekly and totally free. And that's at galacticcenter.org. While you're there, at my new website, check out my Patreon. If you want to talk with me online live every week, become part of the Patreon, because weekly we have live classes. We talk about the spirituality, what's going on in the world. We make sense of it. It is truly a spiritual community. Check that out on galacticcenter.org. And don't forget my galactic planner. If you want to know how these aspects, where all the planets are, compared to your personal life, sign up. You will get your personal predictions. It's like having your personal astrologer. And we have included a lot of new things, including the eclipses and how they affect you in the planner. So check it out. Go to galacticplanner.com. And most of all, if this talk has inspired you to learn astrology, go to my university website. This is where you can not only learn astrology, but become an astrologer, certified Vedic astrologer. Go to universityofvedicastrology.com and you can become my student. It's self-paced. You can join anytime. Now, getting back to what I wrote about in this book concerning eclipses. Eclipses are when you have the sun and the moon align with the earth, and the nodes of the moon are simply points in space where the moon joins the ecliptic. So astronomically, we're on planet Earth, and what we're looking at is the ecliptic. What is the ecliptic? The ecliptic is the apparent path that the sun goes around the Earth every year. So where this path, the moon intersects it going upward, where the moon crosses the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun, on its upward motion. This is Rahu. Rahu is simply the north node of the moon. So what we're talking about are the lunar nodes, where the moon will intersect the ecliptic. So as it goes up and crosses the ecliptic going downward, which is exactly opposite from where it crossed going northward, it will be exactly opposite southward, and that is Ketu, the south node of the moon. So these are the lunar nodes. So Rahu and Ketu are always exactly opposite in degree. And it's where the moon hits the ecliptic going upward, Rahu hits the ecliptic going downward, Ketu. So essentially though, if you take the sun, the moon, and the earth, what happens is around the time of eclipses is where all three align. So it's like where we come together, the nodes of the moon will be close to where the new moon is, or the full moon. Now, every month we have a new moon. The new moon is simply where the sun and the moon exactly conjunct. That's a new moon. Every month we have 12 a year. And then 2 weeks later, when we have the full moon, that's what a lunar eclipse is about. But let me explain. Because we have the new moon, the full moon every month, it is only when the new moon and or the full moon line up with Rahu and Ketu, that is when we have an eclipse. And this only happens twice a year, always 6 months apart. And if you track the degrees of the eclipses from year to year to year, I'm not talking about the 6 months apart time period, but 1 year apart, you will find that each eclipse will occur 10 degrees backwards in the zodiac. So it's constantly moving 10 degrees backwards in the zodiac each and every year. So that's why you have them in a different sign. But in reality, Rahu and Ketu, they stay in a sign for a year and a half, precisely 18 months. So as they change signs, every 18 years, we will have where Rahu and Ketu go through all 12 of the signs. And remember, Rahu and Ketu stay in a sign for a year and a half, 18 months, they stay in one sign, but it takes 18 and a half years for Rahu and Ketu to go through all 12 signs of the zodiac. And this is where it gets really interesting. So when we're talking about an eclipse, and we're talking about where Rahu and Ketu are, sometimes you can have an eclipse where the sun and the moon, that new moon, may not be in the same sign as Rahu and Ketu. Because remember, they're never exactly conjunct. Yes, if they are exactly conjunct, and what I mean by that is if the new moon and Rahu or Ketu are conjunct, that new moon, then you have a total solar eclipse. But we don't always have total solar eclipses where the light is completely blocked. We have partial and, even less than that. But here is something, now I hope I don't lose you in this. This is something astronomical. But eclipses are part of families, and these are called the Saros series. So every 18 and a half years, we will have eclipses come back to the same sign that they were in 18 and a half years ago, because remember, Rahu and Ketu take 18 and a half years to go through all 12 signs. So when they return to a certain sign, that is part of the same Saros series. And these Saros series, I find them to be fascinating because back when I did Western astrology, I used to go back to the beginning of a Saros series and look at the chart for where that Saros series began. And that would flavor what the eclipse, the entire Saros series would be similar to. But remember, they always come back to a particular sign. And this Saros series takes from beginning to end. So here it is, an eclipse series will begin at either the North or the South Pole. So they begin where they're partial, and that means they're not very close to Rahu and Ketu, so a partial eclipse. And therefore, it starts at one of the poles. And then every 18 and a half years, you'll have a return of the same pattern or series. But for it to cover the whole globe, and when it gets to the center of right around where the equator is, from the North or South Pole, that's where you're going to start having the total solar eclipses, which means the sun and the moon align closer to Rahu or Ketu. And this takes from a whole Saros series, from beginning to end, will be about 1,226 years to about 1,550 years for each of these Saros series to start from one of the poles and end at another pole. Then it begins again, but a new Saros series. And these Saros series are numbered, but this is like a whole cycle of these eclipses. But let me get back to something more basic. So talking about the eclipses and when they occur in the same sign every 18 and a half years, this will determine pretty much the sign will flavor things that happen in the world as well as how it happens in your personal birth chart. Because wherever this eclipse is occurring, what house it's in your birth chart will be the experience that you have. But remember, during a time of eclipse, all the other planets are in different signs or aspects. So no eclipse, if you go back 18.5 years ago, will be exactly the same for you. But there will be similarities because that new moon close to Rahu and Ketu will be in a particular house. And let me say this eclipse that is happening on September 21st, it happens to happen where the new moon is going to be 4 degrees of Virgo. But we have Ketu, which is, let me put this eclipse chart up just so you can see a visual of this. This is the eclipse I'm putting up for September 21st. And as you can see, the new moon is where the sun and the moon are, exactly at 4 degrees 52 minutes. They come together exactly. Now we know the moon is constantly moving, and it actually moves 1 degree every 2.5 hours. So, but this is the minute, the time, globally around the world that this eclipse happens. I have it for Washington, D.C., and when the sun and moon are exact, it's going to be 3:55 p.m. It may be Central Time. Well, it will be Central Time. It will be an hour earlier, so it'll be 2:55 p.m. And likewise, Mountain Time, 1:55, and likewise on the West Coast, it will be, 12:55. But it's all happening simultaneously. It's just a different time in all the different time zones. But the eclipse happens. And as you can see, Ketu sits at 24 degrees of Leo. And Rahu sits, of course, at 24 degrees of Aquarius. Now, what determines the guiding line of how it's an eclipse? Here it is. Every 6 months, when Rahu and Ketu align with the new moon, they must be within 18 degrees. That is the orb of influence that determines an eclipse. So if you'll look from 24 to 4, they are 10 degrees apart from each other. 30 degrees to a sign, remember that. So 24, that means 6 degrees from 24 Leo to the beginning of Virgo. And we have Virgo, sun and moon, at 4 degrees. So that 6 and 4, they're 10 degrees apart. They must be within 18 degrees to be an eclipse. So the widest orb would be 18 degrees. After that, it's not an eclipse. But when you get them exactly closer together, that's where you're getting a total solar eclipse. Why? Because Rahu and Ketu are these planes of where the sun, the moon, and the earth align. And that's an eclipse. And that's where you get the shadows cast from each other, causing the eclipse. So when we have, and each eclipse, 6 months apart, one will be with Rahu and one will be with Ketu. So this one is with Ketu. It aligns closest to Ketu, see? In February, when we have another eclipse, they will be aligned with Rahu. So each 6 months, they go from one to the other. So from Ketu to Rahu, from Rahu back to Ketu, each 6 months. When the sun, the moon conjunction of the new moon comes together within an 18-degree orb of Rahu and Ketu. They do not have to be in the same signs. But remember, the eclipse degree is the new moon, not where Rahu and Ketu are. Even though I will say, absolutely, it's true where Rahu and Ketu are in your chart will reflect a lot of change, where change is happening in your life. But we must refer back to where the sun and moon are. They are still heavily influenced by the nodal axes, even though they're in a different sign. And most of the time they are in the same sign, but not always. So this is what I want you to know. You know what I think is so amazing about eclipses? How in the world, when you think about the diameters and the size of the sun as compared to the size of the moon and comparatively to the size of the earth, how is it when they align, they perfectly, when you have a total solar eclipse or lunar eclipse, they perfectly cover each other, the diameter, the size, when they're such a completely different size. And I think this is because the symbology, there is this divine order and perfection of things in our world. And eclipses equate to the principle of duality here on Earth. The sun is day, the moon is night. The sun is male, the moon is female. It's just the sun is the father, the moon is the mother. It's that duality of planet Earth that we are a part of. Eclipses bring this out so beautifully. So a solar eclipse, remember, is a new moon, and it's where the Earth aligns with the sun and the moon, but the moon is between the Earth and the sun, and it is the moon that actually blanks out, darkens the light of the sun. I find that fascinating. And then when you have a lunar eclipse, that is where the light of the moon is blanketed out, because it is the earth that casts the shadow on the moon. So once again, it's the sun, the earth, the moon. And even when we're looking at the solar eclipse, same thing. We have the sun, the moon, and the earth. And always it's so symbolic that the light is blanketed out. Now this eclipse on September 21st, I've already done a video on it, basic video of, you know, what sign it's in and what's going on. Notice though that Saturn sits 4 degrees, exactly opposing the sun and the moon, which is the eclipse point at 4 degrees of Virgo. And Saturn's heavy. Saturn is responsibility, and Saturn is karma. So many things are coming out of the dark. Because remember, an eclipse and Rahu and Ketu represent our karma, our destiny. So eclipses are so vitally important. Every 6 months, we get an opportunity to see things within our own lives and, of course, the world that's been hidden. But in the dark comes the hidden shadow that we need to learn. So always something from our past, something that we need to learn from, will come out of an eclipse. That's why I say pay attention to these time periods during eclipses, because this is involving the duality of our planet, the sun, the masculine, father, daytime, principle, lining up with the night. The night is when we dream. The night is the opposite of the day. Coming together in the darkness, we find what we need to know that can help us uncover our shadows to heal our lives. This is huge. But only if you're conscious and aware and looking for it will it be revealed to you. This is an important eclipse because of Saturn's aspect to it. Karma, destiny. And let me explain a little bit about Rahu and Ketu. Because Rahu And let me explain something else. One more thing I want to mention to you. I want you to go back and recognize, I think it was, let me see, the year of 2006 it was. 2006. I want you to go back to that year and try to remember what happened. That was 18 and a half years ago. That's the last time that we had the eclipse in Virgo. And I'm looking at the time of the eclipse, which was September 22nd, 2006. Almost on the exact day. Look at that. And on this chart, it's quite different. Let me put that chart up too, so you can get an idea. Now this one did have the sun, the moon with Ketu, just like this one's a Ketu, but it's 18 and a half years ago. A whole different energy. Saturn's in a different place, but I will say Saturn, well, is aspecting it by its third aspect, but still, there are completely different variables going on. And I find it fascinating that Saturn is conjunct Neptune right now. And in this chart, Saturn's opposed Neptune. So there's something very similar going on in your life and in the world that's comparative to the year of 2006, because the eclipse happened then. During that time, that eclipse was with Ketu. The same in Virgo. So it would have been aspecting in a particular house in your chart, the same as it is now, as it was then in 2006. And then, let me just say this, in my book, World Predictions 2024 to 2042, what I did was I went back to all the different time periods when Rahu and Ketu were in particular signs to make predictions about each year. So in other words, I went back to where Rahu and Ketu in this book were last in Rahu in Aquarius and Ketu in Leo. And for 18 months, it will be there. And of course, where the nodes are going to be around those times, the signs that the eclipses are happening in. So, because why? Rahu and Ketu are the determinants that cause eclipses. It's just that sometimes, not too often though, we will have the solar eclipse where the sun and moon are in a sign close to Rahu or Ketu, but they're in a different sign. That's what I definitely wanted to clear up. But so wherever Rahu and Ketu are, we're going to have eclipses. Just like next February of 2026, we're going to have where the sun and the moon are going to be in Aquarius with Rahu. Okay? So eclipses are part of the nodal axes. They cause eclipses, yes. So I went back, though, historically in this book, many years to determine what happened when the nodes were in a particular sign. So every 18 and a half years, they're going to be in the signs that they're wherever they are during whatever time you're in question about. So that's what I did each and every year of this book. And what I found when they were in these particular signs, this is what happened. So there were some catastrophic events. There was the Tiananmen Square massacre that happened in 1989. And while they were still in those signs, Rahu in Aquarius and Ketu in Leo, it was 1988 that was the Pan Am airline crash, which was really a big start of terrorism on airlines and all that was started occurring more commonly. But some real interesting things. You see, Rahu in Aquarius is about invention, and particularly in the nakshatra called Shatabhishak. That particular nakshatra does deal with invention and healing. It's the 100 healers. It's the sky watcher, Shatabhishak. And so when these nodes go into particular nakshatras, they bring out what those nakshatras are about. And here's what happened in 2007 when we had Rahu in Aquarius, Ketu in Leo. The iPhone was released. Think about how that changed our lives. Then also the first man on the moon, 1969. And so that really talks of invention. And get this, in 1969 also was when the internet was invented at the university, UCLA. So invention is coming, and like we know, everyone, the talk of the town of the world is AI, and that's going to change our world, just like the iPhone and the internet did. It's starting now. This is the initiation period of radical changes, with the nodal axes being in Aquarius, Leo. And we also find there was major changes in leadership and world rulers around this time. As a matter of fact, we went back to the last time that they were in, well, yeah, they were in where Ketu's in Leo. Leo's all about leaders. And I believe it was 1932 when they were together, or in those signs. And guess what? That was when the Nazi Party came into power with Adolf Hitler. So there's all sorts of changes, and it's not only bad leadership, I'm not getting to that, but just shifts and changes. What we have found was there was major shifts and changes with these signs that Rahu and Ketu are in, and therefore where Rahu and Ketu are close by is where eclipses are going to be. The uncovering of the secrets, the uncovering of the darkness, the shadow side of everything is revealed. So because we still have this eclipse in Virgo, Virgo deals with healing, and it also definitely deals with disease potential. There's been so many discoveries and things coming out about disease potential and how we can better aim at curing disease. A lot is going to be uncovered about this because eclipses uncover things. So it's not a bad thing, but you know, eclipses will be where there is a definite sort of like blackout, you know, like where things, we just get completely, like our awareness is blacked out for a little bit, but out of the darkness comes the light, and the healing occurs from it all. Eclipses are an amazing symbolic thing in our world and in our life, and what we discover about ourselves is the most important thing that eclipses can bring into our awareness. This is amazing work. So, you know, always look to where the eclipses are occurring a year, each and every year. And remember, each and every year they will shift the points of the eclipses, and that's the sun and the moon, 10 degrees backwards in the zodiac. But always Rahu and Ketu are nearby because it is the lineup of the sun, the moon, and the earth. And that's what Rahu and Ketu are. Let me close with a little myth from Vedic astrology, from the ancient myths of this beautiful science. And in the myth, they talk about how Rahu and Ketu came about. And so it said that all the planets were aligned to receive the nectar of immortality. So the planets were immortality. And all of a sudden, some snakes slithered in between the sun and the moon. Isn't that interesting that they named the sun and the moon? And before they could do anything, they told Lord Vishnu, they said, you know, there's some foreign guys here, there's a snake. And before Vishnu threw a disc and sliced the serpent in half, it got the nectar of immortality right before it was split in half. And what is said is Rahu is the head of the dragon, where Ketu is the tail of the dragon. And Rahu is the essence of the thinking mind, but Rahu is said to be the illusions of the world, where Ketu is the bottom half, which can be our gut knowing without the thinking mind. And the thinking mind, most of the time you have to realize, screws us up. You know, when we overthink things and we think something's a certain way, you know, and it's the illusions of the world. And Rahu is said to be our desire body, what we want more than anything in the world, what we desire. And it's all part of the materialistic world. And therefore, Rahu rules such things as addictions, because once we get part of that nectar, or that whatever it is that we want more than anything, we think, I want more. And there's where the greed and the excess starts to come from, what Rahu can symbolize in the materialistic world. Rahu brings us into the world, don't forget, and our desires keep us in this world. But on the other side of that, Ketu can deal with taking us out of this world. Ketu is other worlds, otherworldliness, and it does many times deal with death and endings, but it deals with our intuition and our psychic ability, our knowingness without the thinking mind. And Ketu clears the illusions of this world, takes us into the reality and the truth, the spirituality. Ketu is that. Ketu deals with our spirituality. And so right now, we are dealing with an eclipse with Ketu that can clear and bring us into a more spiritual awareness with Ketu. Whereas Rahu creates more desires, Ketu is letting go and realizing the truth. So be aware that right now we're in the phase of an eclipse season with Ketu. And yes, many people look at the lunar eclipse, which right now they're kind of backwards, because right now until May of 2026 we have the lunar eclipse before the solar eclipse. And starting May of 2026, we'll have the solar eclipse, then the lunar eclipse. And the fact that the lunar eclipse happens first is, to me, a little bit like that should be the fruition of what the eclipse is about. So it's a little messed up. It's a little bit backwards. We're not proceeding forward. But I think once we have, and what I'm talking about, by May of 2026 and June of 2026, we will then have the new moon, then the full moon within a month, within the month. And also we will have the solar eclipse with the lunar eclipse following. After that point in time, it switches back and forth. But for long periods of time, it stays like that for about a year or more. So that is what you're going to see happening too. But this lunar eclipse is important. They shed light on things. They bring the light out of the dark. But the solar eclipse is the focal point. That is where you should be putting your attention as to where you're going and what's happening. Remember, the new moon is the new beginning. So once it reaches its fullness and begins to wane, it's like the whole cyclic process is come to fruition. But it's time to begin anew. And what I'm looking at also, during the time of that solar eclipse, I'm going to do a video on this, but just a few days later, around the 24th, is going to be a critical time, because Mars is going to line up with Uranus and Pluto. And those are indicators of radical shifts and changes. Mars is a trigger. I'll talk about that later on, because there's a lot to talk about with that aspect occurring. But with that, I hope now you really do have a grasp and understanding of what an eclipse is, and an understanding of Rahu and Ketu, the lunar nodes, the north and the south node of the moon, and how they activate our life, because they are about bringing us into the world and taking us out, and the many realizations of who we are karmically, why we're here, and what we're here to learn. That is the bringers of our destiny, Rahu and Ketu. Plus the eclipses are where the light is open to better understand these periods of time of what we need to know to better change and transform our individual lives, our purpose, why we're here. So with that, I think I'll close. If you would like more information on me, go to my website, galacticcenter.org. And if you would like to learn from me, become my student, if this has inspired you, come on board, come anytime. I promise you, you can become an astrologer and or just learn astrology for your own self. It is the greatest tool for self-discovery. Go to universityofvedicastrology.com. Thank you.